Looking for something new in sci-fi or fantasy? Check out what Brandon Sanderson, Orson Scott Card, Nnedi Okorafor, and others chose as the best news stories of the year in the L. Ron Hubbard Presents Writers of the Future Anthology. From 24 award-winning authors and illustrators, plus art and writing tips and bonus stories. L. Ron Hubbard Presents Writers of the Future. Buy your copy at galaxypress.com, Amazon, or wherever books are sold.
All right, everybody, it's time for you to get out and nominate your favorite podcast. Yes, it is that time of year again. There's a show I want you to consider for the People's Choice Podcast Awards. UFO Undercover, in the category of entertainment. UFO Undercover brings you some of the most revealing and current research that is being done with respect to alien abductions and contact. Host Joe Montaldo has been an abduction researcher for over 35 years and is uniquely qualified to bring you live interviews with some of the most well-known researchers in ufology. Go to podcastawards.com to nominate UFO Undercover in the category of entertainment. That's podcastawards.com, and please take a moment and get out and vote now.
All right, everybody. It's time for you to get out and nominate your favorite podcasts. There's an amazing show I want you to consider for the People's Choice Podcast Awards. The Outer Realm in the category of Best Female Hosted Podcast. The Outer Realm is a very popular show hosted by Michelle DeRoche and Amelia Pisano, which boasts millions of listeners each week who are well known for and have been complimented on their very laid-back, roundtable style of interviewing. Together, this dynamic duo brings you the best of the best with guests from around the world who are well-versed within their respective fields of ufology, paranormal, esoteric, and other areas of high strangeness, and more. So go to podcastawards.com to nominate The Outer Realm in the category Best Female Hosted Podcast. That's podcastawards.com, and please take a moment and do it now.
You are listening to UPRN, United Public Radio Network, coming to you live on 105.3 right up to 107.7 FM from the beautiful city of New Orleans. UPRNTalkRadio.com.
The Allens Investigate, airing live on the United Public Radio Network, 105.3 FM in New Orleans. Yay, and welcome to the Allens Investigate with me, Shona Allen.
And I'm Gary Allen, the Cockney Bard.
We're broadcasting live on the United Public Radio Network 105.3 and 107.7 FM from New Orleans and on Roku TV. Now, this week, we're going to be taking a look at 50s icon and legend, blonde bombshell Marilyn Monroe, her life, loves, film career, and her suspicious death. The former Hollywood star is still very much loved around the world, even now, some 60 years on.
It's amazing, isn't it?
It is amazing indeed. Now, to begin with, Marilyn was born Norma Jean Mortensen on June the 1st, 1926 in Los Angeles, California. Her mother, Gladys Pearl Baker, who was born in Mexico to a poor Midwestern family who migrated to California at the turn of the century. When she was just 15 years old, Gladys married John Newton Baker, who unfortunately was an abusive man, 9 years her senior. They had two children, Robert and Bernice. She successfully filed for divorce and sole custody in 1923, but Baker kidnapped the children and moved to his native Kentucky, which is awful, isn't it? It's a terrible thing to happen.
Goodness me.
Now, following the divorce, Gladys then worked as a film negative cutter at Consolidated Film Industries. She married Martin Edward Mortensen in 1924, but they separated a few months later and divorced in 1928. But more recently, In 2022, DNA testing has indicated that Marilyn's father was Charles Stanley Gifford, who was a co-worker of Gladys's, with whom she supposedly had an affair in 1925. Now, although Gladys was both financially and mentally unprepared for having a child, it appears that Marilyn's early childhood was actually a stable and happy one to start with. Gladys placed Marilyn with foster parents Albert and Ida Bollinger in the rural town of Hawthorne, which is very sad, isn't it, that they had to place her into that. It's dreadful, yeah, very, very sad. Gladys also lived there for 6 months herself until she was forced to move back to the city for employment. She then visited Marilyn at weekends. In 1933, Gladys was able to buy a small house in Hollywood with a loan and moved the 7-year-old Marilyn in with her. Unfortunately, in 1934, Gladys had a mental breakdown and was diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia. After several months in a rest home, she was committed to the Metropolitan State Hospital. Gladys spent the rest of her life in and out of hospitals, and Marilyn became a ward of the state. Her mother's friend, Grace Goddard, taking responsibility over her and her mother's affairs. Now, later on, I know Marilyn did sometimes go to visit her mother, but I believe her mother was unaware of really who she
so Marilyn's
was.
had a dreadful start, really, hasn't she?
So that was a pretty awful start for her.
Yeah.
Now, Marilyn spent most of her childhood in a total of 12 foster homes and at an orphanage. During her stay with the Atkinson family, it's claimed that she may have been sexually abused.
Yeah.
Always a shy girl, she now developed a stutter and became withdrawn. So I think that would probably be an indicator that something definitely
wrong,
happened to her. In 1937, Marilyn stayed with the Goddards, Grace being her mother's friend. During this stay, which only lasted a few months, Grace Goddard's husband, Doc, molested Marilyn. Marilyn then lived for brief periods with her relatives and Grace's friends. So
I think this is, not many people would have known this side of the Marilyn when she was in the early years, would they?
No, sadly
so
not.
It's terrible, isn't it?
So Marilyn's childhood experiences basically made her want to become an actress. She said, "I didn't like the world around me, and because it was kind of grim. Some of my foster families used to send me to the movies to get me out of the house, and there I'd sit all day and way into the night up front, there with the screen so big, a little kid all alone, and I loved it." So there really is where her passion for becoming an actress began, I believe.
Yeah.
Now, Marilyn found a more permanent home in 1938 when she started living with Grace's Aunt Anna. Now, I know she was really fond of Grace's Aunt Anna because she said, I believe she's quoted somewhere as saying, actually, that was the only person that really, truly loved me and I loved her. So she was actually a very, very good sort of impression on Marilyn. She was also a Christian Scientist as well. And I think a lot of her understanding of Christian Science kind of rubbed off on Marilyn. And she was always really, really supportive of Marilyn, telling her that, she could do what she wanted to do.
Yeah.
And she was very encouraging to her. So I think
having a massive help,
having on Gracie's Aunt Anna, I think, was a massive, massive boost to Marilyn. Unfortunately, owing to Aunt Anna's health problems, because she was actually quite old, Marilyn unfortunately had to return to live with Grace and Doc Goddard in 1941. But the Goddards were forced to relocate in 1942 due to Doc's employer relocating him. And child protection laws in America prevented the Goddards from taking Marilyn out of state. So Marilyn was faced with having to return to the orphanage. Now, as a solution, because she really didn't want to do that, She ended up marrying her neighbour's 21-year-old son, James Doherty, on June the 19th, 1942, just after her 16th birthday. So it's incredibly young.
Yeah.
Marilyn dropped out of high school and became a housewife, which she found extremely dull because she was a very bright little button and that was not a life for her.
Not really.
So in 1943, Jimmy Doherty enlisted in the Merchant Marine and was stationed on Santa Catalina Island, where Marilyn moved with him. In 1944, Doherty was shipped out to the Pacific, where he remained for most of the next 2 years. Marilyn moved in with her in-laws and began working at the Radio Plane Company, which was a munitions factory in Van Nuys. In late 1944, she met photographer David Conover, who had been sent by the US Army Air Force's first motion picture unit to the factory to shoot morale-boosting pictures of the female workers.
So it was a lucky break, wasn't it, for Marilyn?
It certainly was. Marilyn then quit working at the factory in January 1945 and began modelling for Conover and his friends, defying her husband, who was not actually very happy about this.
Not happy about it.
No. Would you have been very happy about that?
No, not happy. Not happy about that, no.
Anyway, she defied her husband and she moved on her own and signed a contract with the Blue Book Model Agency in August 1945. Now, the agency deemed Marilyn's figure more suited to pin-up rather than high fashion modeling because she was very curvaceous.
She was, yeah.
And she was featured mostly in advertisements and men's magazines. In order to make herself more employable, she straightened her hair and dyed it blonde, just like her idol, Jean Harlow. Jean Harlow was a huge inspiration to Marilyn, because obviously she grew up watching her on the big screen and she had a collection of cigarette cards with pictures of Jean Harlow. So she was a massive inspiration to Marilyn, more so than I think people realise.
So the old man, I mean, he wasn't happy about this at all, was he?
No, well, she wasn't too worried about that. Good for her. Marilyn quickly became one of its most ambitious and hardworking models to the agency, and by early 1946, she'd appeared on 33 magazine covers. As a pseudonym, Marilyn sometimes used the name Jean Norman. Not a lot of people know that.
No.
Through her agency, Marilyn signed a contract with an acting agency in June 1946. After an unsuccessful interview at Paramount Pictures, she was given a screen test by Ben Lyon, a 20th Century Fox executive. Head executive Daryl F. Zanuck was unenthusiastic, but gave her a standard 6-month contract to avoid her being signed by rival studio RKO Pictures. Marilyn's contract began in August 1946, and she and Lyon selected the stage name Marilyn Monroe. The first name was picked by Lyon, who was reminded of Broadway star Marilyn Miller. The surname was Marilyn's mother's maiden name. Now, coincidentally, the MM is actually quite an interesting one because you'll notice there is a bit of esoteric significance with the MM.
As in Master Mason.
Yeah. And I think that if people actually, I'm not going to declare it on here, but I think if people do a little bit of research on MM,
they might find something interesting.
They might find something very interesting. So I will say no more on that one. In September 1946, Marilyn divorced Jimmy Doherty, who opposed her career.
You must have been gutted about that, mustn't you?
Marilyn spent her first 6 months at Fox learning acting, singing and dancing, as well as observing the filmmaking process. Her contract was renewed in February 1947, and she was given her first film roles, which were bit parts in Dangerous Years and Scudda-Hoo, Scudda-Hey.
So in 1948, that was, yeah.
The studio also enrolled her in the Actors Laboratory Theatre. Her teachers there thought her too shy and insecure to have a future in acting. God, weren't they wrong?
Absolutely. Good job they didn't invest in that one.
And so Fox did not renew her contract in August 1947. She returned to modelling while also doing occasional odd jobs at film studios, such as dancing behind the scenes as a pacer, which basically is a dancer who helps keep the lead dancers on point during musical sets. Now, Marilyn was determined to make it as an actress and continued studying at the Actors Lab. She had a small role in the play Glamour Preferred at the Bliss Hayden Theatre, but unfortunately it ended after a couple of performances. To network, Marilyn befriended gossip columnist Sidney Skulski and became a friend of Fox executive Joseph M. Schenck, who became infatuated with her and played a key role in launching her career. He persuaded his friend Harry Cohn, head executive of Columbia Pictures, to sign her in March 1948. It was here that she began working with the studio's head drama coach, Natasha Leites, who would remain her mentor until 1955.
Wow, so that was a lucky break for Marilyn, wasn't it?
Yes, her only film at the studio was the low-budget musical Ladies of the Chorus in 1948, in which she had her starring role. That's where that...
You ever seen that film? Never seen that, no.
Yes, I have, a very, very long time ago. It's not a particular favourite of mine, but it's got every baby needs a daddy to keep her worry-free. So that's
is that where that come from?
Yeah.
Oh wow. Okay.
Yeah. So that's one of the songs that I like, but the film itself I wasn't quite so keen.
No.
Love Marilyn, not so keen on the film, sadly.
Pence film, wasn't it? Pence film.
Well, you haven't seen it, have you?
No, but well, from your description of it, it was Pence. Well, what can you say?
When her contract ended at Columbia, Marilyn returned to modelling. She shot a commercial for Pabst Beer and posed nude for artistic photographs by Tom Kelly for John Baumgarth calendars using the name Mona Monroe. Maybe that's where the song comes from. She had previously posed topless or in bikinis for other artists, including Earl Moran, and so she was comfortable with nudity. It wasn't a problem for her. Shortly after leaving Columbia, she met and became the protege of Johnny Hyde, who was vice president of the William Morris Agency. Taking her on as a client, he had her undergo minor plastic surgery. Now, it's quite interesting with that because that's always been mooted that she had plastic surgery, but I think it was only very minor because I think if you compare the pictures of when she was very young, I think there are sort of little things that you can notice. One of the things that actually really upset Marilyn is she did hear some studio execs at a party once, I believe, and they called her the Chinless Wonder, which is a terrible thing to say.
Yeah, but it would have destroyed her, wouldn't it?
And so I think she did have a little bit of an issue with that. So I think that probably was part of it to try and help build her confidence.
Yeah, for sure.
Now, he used his influence to help her land the roles of Angela in Asphalt Jungle and Miss Caswell in All About Eve. The buzz generated by her performance enabled Hyde to negotiate a contract for Marilyn with 20th Century Fox. So that was a really big thing for her.
Yeah, it was a massive, massive thing, wasn't it?
Just a few days after securing the contract, though, Hyde died of a heart attack aged 55. Now, despite Hyde being 31 years Marilyn's senior, Hyde left his wife for her. He wanted to marry her, but she repeatedly...
Why did he do that?
She repeatedly refused his marriage proposals. She said she loved Hyde, but was not actually in love with him. So I think...
Oh, I don't understand.
Judging by that, I would suspect it was more of a father figure for her. So... I
mean, why would you do that? Why would you leave your wife... why would you leave your wife, for a gorgeous thing like Marilyn Monroe? I can't understand. Oh dear, some men, eh? Some
Oh
men.
dear, oh dear.
Mm.
Anyway, despite Marilyn's screen time only being a few minutes in the asphalt jungle, she gained a mention in photoplay, and according to biographer Donald Spotto, moved effectively from being a movie model to a serious actress. In 1951, Marilyn had supporting roles in 3 moderately successful Fox comedies: As Young as You Feel, Love Nest,
Yeah, and let's make it legal.
Make it legal.
Yeah.
She received high praise from critics. Bosley Crowther of New York Times described her as superb in As Young as You Feel, and Ezra Goodman of the Los Angeles Daily News called her one of the brightest up-and-coming actresses for Love's Nest.
For Love's Nest, yeah. Very interesting, that, isn't it?
It is. Her popularity with audiences was also growing, and she received several thousand fan letters a week and was declared Miss Cheesecake of 1951 by the Army newspaper Stars and Stripes.
Yeah, they loved her, the soldiers, didn't they?
They did. In February 1952, the Hollywood Foreign Press Association named Marilyn the best young box office personality. In her private life, Marilyn had a short relationship with director Elia Kazan and briefly dated director Nicholas Ray and actors Yul Brynner and also Peter Lawford. I wonder if he had hair at that point, Yul Brynner.
Yul Brynner?
Yeah.
Wow.
Looks a bit like you, actually.
Well, I beg your pardon, madam. That's enough of that. Thank you very much.
In early 1952, she began a highly publicized romance with retired New York Yankees baseball star Joe DiMaggio, one of the most famous sports personalities of the era. Wow. Yeah. Marilyn found herself at the center of a scandal in March 1952 when she revealed publicly that she had posed for a nude calendar in 1949. The studio had learned about the photos and that she was publicly rumored to be the model, and some weeks prior. And so together with Marilyn, although I believe Marilyn was more instrumental in this, decided that to prevent damage to her career, it was best to admit to them, while stressing that she had been broke at the time. This strategy gained her public sympathy and increased interest in her films, for which she was now receiving top billing. In the wake of the scandal, she was featured on the cover of Life magazine as the talk of Hollywood. Now, 3 of Marilyn's films, A Clash by Night, Don't Bother to Knock, and We're Not Married, were released soon after to capitalize on public interest. So I think that was quite carefully orchestrated, in my opinion.
Absolutely, yeah. They was already setting her up, weren't they?
Of course.
Absolutely, there was.
Despite her newfound popularity as a sex symbol, Marilyn also wanted to showcase more of her acting range. She had begun taking acting classes with Michael Chekhov and Lottie Gesler. In Howard Hawks' Monkey Business, and I love that film, one of my favourites.
I don't remember that one, Monkey Business.
She acted opposite Cary Grant, playing a childish blonde, innocently unaware of the havoc her sexiness causes around her. She appeared in a passing vignette as a 19th century streetwalker in O. Henry's Full House with Charles Lawton. And Marilyn added to her reputation as a new sex symbol with publicity stunts that year, which included wearing a revealing dress when acting as Grand Marshal at the Miss America pageant parade. And she told gossip columnist Earl Wilson that she usually wore no underwear.
What? That's outrageous.
So I think clearly she was aware that that was definitely going to get her in the newspapers
like
and
today,
the magazines.
Isn't it? It's what they do.
Exactly. So she wasn't stupid.
No, very bright, Marilyn.
By the end of the year, gossip columnist Flora Belle Muir named Marilyn the It Girl of 1952. During this period, Marilyn started to gain a reputation for being difficult to work with, which would worsen as her career progressed, unfortunately. She was often late or didn't even show up, didn't remember lines, and would demand several retakes before she was satisfied with her performance. Now, I feel, to be honest with that, it's a little unfair, because I think with Marilyn that she wanted very much to be a serious actress, and she was always being portrayed as a dumb blonde, and you know, she was far more than that.
She was very bright, wasn't she, Marilyn?
Her dependence on acting coaches Natasha Lytess and then Paula Strasberg also annoyed and irritated directors immensely. These issues have been attributed to a combination of perfectionism, low self-esteem, and stage fright, because she did suffer stage fright. She disliked her lack of control on film sets and never experienced these kind of problems during photo shoots, in which she had more say over her performance and her creativity, and she could be far more spontaneous because she was a very creative person. To alleviate problems sleeping and anxiety, because she had terrible problems with sleeping, she began using barbiturates and amphetamines and alcohol, which exacerbated her problems. According to some of Marilyn's behavior was also in response to the condescension and sexism of her male co-stars and directors, and it's said that she was also bullied by many of her directors. So it was an incredibly male-dominated era during
what period was that?
In the 1950s.
Yeah, but it was the early 50s, before Niagara and that. Yeah.
So that was a big problem for her that she had to deal with. And Marilyn starred in 3 films that were released in 1953 and emerged as a major sex symbol, and one of those Hollywood's most bankable stars, which she certainly was. Now, the first was the Technicolor film noir Niagara. This is another favourite of mine. I love Niagara.
Yeah, good film.
By then, Marilyn and her makeup artist, Alan Whitey Snyder, had developed her trademark makeup look, arched brows, glistening red lips, and the beauty mark.
Yeah.
Now, when Niagara was released in January 1953, women's clubs protested as the film as being immoral. Now, the reason being, it was quite racy in those days, because there were several sort of
well, the Niagara
scenes,
dress is great.
Yeah, and several scenes of her just in a sheet and things like that. So to women, then it was all a little bit shocking. However, it proved extremely popular with audiences.
That was the hip swaying, wasn't it? Yeah,
it certainly was, and it's a very good film too. Good story.
Yeah.
Marilyn continued to attract attention by wearing revealing outfits, most famously at the Photo Play Awards in January 1953, where she won Fastest Rising Star Award. She wore that famous sunburst pleated waist-tight plunging neckline gold lame dress, which was designed by William Trevilla. He designed a few of her dresses.
Well, that hip swaying thing from that film Niagara probably led on to Jane Mansfield in The Girl Can't Help It, wasn't it?
I think almost certainly that Jane Mansfield modelled herself on Marilyn.
Oh, absolutely.
Almost certainly. Anyway, that was the dress made by and designed by William Trevilla for Gentlemen Prefer Blondes, which actually was barely seen at all in the film, interestingly, but was to become a sensation. And that's actually one of her iconic pictures too, isn't it? Joan Crawford called her behaviour unbecoming as an actress and as a lady. So she clearly was not amused by that. Possibly more so because she was getting more attention, I suspect.
She was a big star, Joan Crawford, wasn't she?
She was.
And then you get this blonde come along and
usurp
take the mantle off you.
Anyway, Marilyn's second film of 1953 was the satirical musical comedy Gentlemen Prefer Blondes, which cemented her screen persona as a dumb blonde. As part of the film's publicity campaign, she and Jane Russell pressed their hand and footprints in wet cement outside Grauman's Chinese Theatre.
Now, that's the Little Rock one, isn't it? With just 2 girls from Little Rock in that film, was it?
Yeah, Diamonds Are a Girl's Best Friend.
Oh, right, okay.
And we've actually been there and visited, and that was quite something for me to go and see. As a big super fan of Marilyn, it was wonderful.
Yeah, absolutely.
And we also saw her star, didn't we, on The Pavement?
Yeah, we did.
Now, Gentlemen Prefer Blondes was released shortly after and became one of the biggest box office successes of the year. And I'm really not surprised by that because it was a super film. Now, despite the film's title, though, Marilyn was paid her usual contract salary of $500 a week, while Jane Russell earned $200,000. Now, Marilyn did actually comment on this at the time and said, bearing in mind that it's called Gentlemen Prefer Blondes, she said, I think I ought to be paid more. And I agree with her. Marilyn's rendition of the song Diamonds Are a Girl's Best Friend and her pink dress are considered iconic, and her performance has inspired homages by the likes of Madonna, Beyonce, Kylie Minogue, Anna Nicole Smith, and Nicole Kidman. And I think you could safely say that Anna Nicole Smith certainly modelled her look on Marilyn. Although totally different characters, of course.
Yeah.
Marilyn co-starred in her third movie of the year, How to Marry a Millionaire, with Betty Grable, her of the legs, and Lauren Bacall.
Yeah, that was a good film.
It was a super film.
Yeah.
It was the second film ever released in CinemaScope, a widescreen format that Fox hoped would draw audiences back to the theatres, as television was beginning to cause losses to film studios. The film was Marilyn's biggest box office success at that point in her career. And Marilyn's position as a leading sex symbol was confirmed in December 1953 when Hugh Hefner featured her on the cover and as centerfold in the first ever issue of Playboy. Although Marilyn did not consent to the publication. The centerfold featured one of her 1949 nude photos. So Marilyn knew nothing about this. She didn't consent to that at all. Hugh Hefner just decided that probably with somebody else, so that that's what would happen. Marilyn had become one of the 20th Century Fox's biggest stars, and yet her contract had not changed since 1950. So she was paid far less than other stars of her status and could not choose her projects. Her attempt to appear in films that would not focus on her as a pin-up had been thwarted by studio executive Daryl F. Zanuck, who had a strong personal dislike of her. Goodness knows why. Anyway, in January 1954, he suspended Marilyn when she refused to begin shooting yet another musical comedy, The Girl in the Pink Tights.
Oh, God, I'm surprised. Didn't bother with that one.
This was front page news.
Oh, God.
And Marilyn immediately took action to counter negative publicity. On January 14th, she and DiMaggio were married at the San Francisco City Hall. 15 days later, they flew to Japan, combining a honeymoon with his commitment to his former San Francisco Seals coach, Lefty O'Toole. To help train Japanese baseball teams, Marilyn traveled with Lefty's wife to Korea, where she participated in a Yuso show, singing songs from her films for over 60,000 US Marines over a 4-day period.
I loved that they did the Marines, didn't they?
I'm not surprised, but actually she wasn't very well during that as well, so I think she caught a chill. But she continued anyway because she was a trooper.
Yeah.
Now, after returning to the US, she was awarded Photoplay's Most Popular Female Star Prize. And Marilyn settled with Fox in March with the promise of a new contract, a bonus of $100,000, and a starring role in the film adaptation of the Broadway hit, The 7-Year Itch.
Ah, The 7-Year Itch.
Another wonderful film.
Yeah, good film.
In 1954, in April, the film River of No Return was released, Marilyn's last film prior to the studio suspension. She called it a Z-grade cowboy movie, but it proved popular with audiences, however. The first film she made after the suspension was the musical There's No Business Like Show Business, which she strongly disliked. In September 1954, Marilyn began filming Billy Wilder's comedy, The 7-Year Itch. Although the film was shot in Hollywood, the studio decided to generate advance publicity by staging the filming of a scene in which Marilyn is standing on a subway grate with the air blowing up her skirt of her white dress on Lexington Avenue in Manhattan.
That was a tremendous idea, though, wasn't it?
It was, and that wasn't that the most iconic image of her as well. I think that everybody remembers that one.
I think everyone knows that one.
Out of all the images, I think that's probably the most famous. So I think that was pretty good. The shoot lasted several hours and attracted over 2,000 spectators at the time. The subway grate scene became one of Marilyn's most famous, and the 7-Year Itch became one of the biggest commercial successes of the year after its release in June 1955. The publicity stunt placed Marilyn on international front pages, but it marked the end of her marriage, sadly, to Joe DiMaggio, who was...
I think he was jealous, wasn't he?
He was infuriated by it.
Yeah, she loved him as well, Joe DiMaggio.
She did, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Joe was allegedly jealous and controlling and was also apparently physically abusive to Marilyn.
Okay.
I think one of the problems in the relationship was he didn't really like the male attention that she received, and he just wanted her to be a housewife. And she didn't want that. She very definitely did not want that. That was not for her. After returning to Hollywood in October 1954, Marilyn filed for divorce after 9 months of marriage. After filming The 7-Year Itch finished in November 1954, Marilyn left Hollywood for the East Coast, where she and photographer Milton Green founded their own production company, Marilyn Monroe Productions, an action that has later been called instrumental in the collapse of the studio system. Now, for a woman to do that at that point is incredible, because women just didn't do that. So she really did something quite amazing.
She took the ball by the horns,
she certainly did, and I think she's probably been rather underestimated for that, in fact. So after founding Marilyn Monroe Productions, Marilyn moved to Manhattan and spent 1955 studying acting. She attended workshops on method acting at the Actors Studio run by Lee Strasberg. She grew close to Lee and his wife Paula, receiving private lessons at their home, and soon became a family member. The Strasbergs remained an important influence for the rest of her career. And interestingly, Marilyn actually left most of her estate to the Strasbergs, Lee Strasberg. Marilyn continued her relationship with Joe DiMaggio, and then also more of a platonic relationship, I would say, but also dated playwright at this point, Arthur Miller. Their relationship became serious when her divorce from Joe finalized in 1955. The studio urged her, however, to end the relationship as Miller was being investigated by the FBI for allegations of communism. But Marilyn refused.
It's very interesting, isn't it?
The relationship led to the FBI opening a file on Marilyn too. By the end of the year, Marilyn and Fox signed a new 7-year contract, as Marilyn Monroe Productions would not be able to finance films alone, and the studio was eager to have Marilyn working for them again. Fox would pay $400,000 to make 4 films and granted her the right to choose her own projects.
See, she'd really took the ball by the horns at that point, hadn't she? Really had control of her life, really. So
she had the right to control her own projects, choose directors and cinematographers. Now, that was unheard of at that point. So she did quite, as I said, an amazing thing. She would also be free to make 1 film with Marilyn Monroe Productions per each completed film for Fox. Marilyn began 1956 by announcing her win over 20th Century Fox. She legally changed her name to Marilyn Monroe. In March, Marilyn began filming Bus Stop, her first film under her new contract, directed under Joshua Logan, who, despite initially doubting her acting abilities, actually towards the end changed his opinion later comparing her to Charlie Chaplin in her ability to blend comedy and tragedy. And I would agree on this point, because I think that her ability to quite naturally be comedic without, putting it on purpose, I think she was really natural at this.
Yeah,
she was naturally funny. In June 29th, 1956, Marilyn married Miller in White Plains, New York. 2 days later, they had a Jewish ceremony at the home of Miller's literary agent, Kay Brown. Marilyn also converted to Judaism, which basically, unfortunately, led to Egypt banning all her films.
Yeah, I'm not sure she was really into that too much, was she? It seems to me that it was more of a career move with Arthur Miller. I don't know, but maybe. The union was viewed by many as a mismatch. In August, Marilyn began filming Marilyn Monroe Productions' first independent production, The Prince and the Showgirl, at Pinewood Studios in England. The production was complicated by conflicts between Laurence Olivier and her. Olivier angering her by patronizing her constantly, which, I think he did do that quite a lot. I've seen things that he said which I would have taken as being You wouldn't have been happy about that, would you?
No, very insulting.
Yeah.
And I think he very much undervalued her abilities as well. When in fact, actually, I thought, personally, in my humble opinion, watching the film, she stole the show. Despite difficulties, filming was completed on schedule and it was released in June 1957. It proved unpopular, unfortunately, with American audiences, and it was better received in Europe. Marilyn then took on an 18-month hiatus to concentrate just on family life. She unfortunately had an ectopic pregnancy mid-1957 and a miscarriage a year later, which is very sad. This was blamed on, she had endometriosis, which she suffered from most of her life. So a lot of people blame it on that.
Yeah.
Which is extremely sad.
Oh, yeah. It's a real problem, isn't it?
Marilyn then returned to Hollywood in July 1958 to act opposite Jack Lemmon and Tony Curtis in Billy Wilder's comedy Some Like It Hot.
Oh, now we're talking. What a fantastic film.
One of my favourites.
She had a short relationship with Tony Curtis, I think.
Yeah, I think he was a little bit rude about her. So he wasn't very, he said it was like kissing Hitler, because basically what happened is that she was a perfectionist and she wanted to make sure that she got the scenes right and her character came across as right. And she did a fantastic job, and it's a good job that she did do that.
Sugar Cane.
Sugar Cane.
Sugar Cane.
That's right, exactly. That was I Want to Be Loved by You, one of the famous ones.
Oh yeah, that was a brilliant film. If you ain't seen it, you must watch that. It's absolutely brilliant film.
A critical and commercial success it was in 1958 when it was released, and it earned her a Golden Globe for Best Actress, proving that she was indeed a very, very good actress and not just a model, which is what Laurence Olivier called her.
Yeah, I think the thing is with Jack Lemmon and what was his name? Jack Lemmon and Tony Curtis dressing up as women. It was fantastic. It would have fit in very well with today's world, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
We won't go there, but
perhaps
anyway.
They knew something.
I think they may have done.
She starred in the musical comedy Let's Make Love, and she had an affair with the co-star Yves Montand, unfortunately. The film she completed was The Misfits, which was the last film she completed, which Arthur Miller actually had written specially for her to provide her with a dramatic role. But unfortunately, I think the filming of this was also wrought with difficulties with Arthur Miller, because she believed that, this was all based on her real life, and she was extremely unhappy about that.
I mean, we wonder with the links to the communists and all that, if Marilyn actually was an agent. I mean, or even a double agent. Who knows? I don't know. But it's quite an interesting theory, isn't it?
Well, I think it's a very interesting theory, actually, because, what better way to be able to kind of disseminate information to people?
For sure, yeah.
You're mixing and mingling with
all the stars,
all the stars,
yeah,
aren't
getting
you?
all the information on them, yeah.
Exactly. Sure. So, it's.
And she was like. I mean, she would have been considered a honey trap, wouldn't she? I mean, what man wouldn't have been interested in Marilyn? Obviously,
Oh, it's a nice comment from Debbie saying, "Looking fantastic, Shona as always." Well, thank you so much, Debbie.
Kind,
that's very kind of you.
What about me?
And well, you always look lovely. You always look lovely, darling.
Oh, I do, yeah, I know.
And a lovely one from Laura Lee as well, saying, "Great topic, Gary and Shona." Thank you so much, Laura Lee. That's very kind. So, unfortunately, due to all this going on with Arthur Miller, she ended up divorcing him in 1961. But I do think that, she was very much interested in intellectuals. And Debbie says, "You're looking very smart." That's very kind of you. Thank you, Debbie. So you don't feel left out.
Oh, that's yeah. Envy is a bad thing.
She basically was a very intellectual person. She had a huge book collection, and she was a very, very avid reader. She loved books. So that's very interesting. So I think probably more than anything, I think she was probably attracted to Arthur Miller's mind rather than anything else.
I think so. That's about it, isn't it?
So it's quite interesting. But yes, I think certainly going back to the possibly being an agent, it is interesting because she was associated with communists mainly via Arthur Miller.
Yeah.
But also she had some contacts in Mexico as well. So that's quite interesting. So it wouldn't have surprised me whether she was being used as some kind of
I think almost certainly. I mean, if the records show it at some point, I'd be very surprised if she wasn't an agent, and she may have been working for both sides. But
I think so, and certainly if we look at another blonde bombshell, Diana Dawes, this is something that she was involved with, and it's quite interesting as well because I don't know whether that many people know that her father was a Freemason. And she actually left some Masonic script, didn't she, that was alleging where her secret bank accounts were, because although she went bankrupt, she did a lot of cash work as well. So there
cash
are
for questions.
Yes, there are things out there, conspiracies out there that perhaps she had some bank accounts.
She was hidden. She was a Diana Dawes was an absolute character, wasn't she?
She was.
She was supposed to be the British Marilyn.
They called her the British Marilyn Monroe, but they were very different characters. Very different indeed. Yeah. In their, and both very, very clever and talented in their own ways.
Sure.
But for sure, Diana Dawes had quite a lot of parties where she videotaped some of her guests in, shall we say, intimate, compromised positions.
Oh dear.
And bearing in mind other well-known people who've been in the media fairly recently with their special island, doesn't take much imagination to think about what actually was going on.
No, I think that's been going on since for a long time, isn't it?
So anyway, it's only my opinion, Gary's opinion, but I think that there is something in that Marilyn certainly, probably also why she had strong ties to the Kennedys. What better way than to find information out? So it's interesting. Anyway, she underwent surgery for endometriosis and spent 4 weeks hospitalized for depression. Now, the thing is, with this so-called depression that she's supposed to have been suffering, she had a problem getting out of this hospital. She was extremely unhappy and wanted to get out, and no one helped her. And it was actually Joe DiMaggio that helped her, and he got her out of the hospital. So clearly he still loved her very much. She moved back to California in 1961, purchasing a house in Brentwood, Los Angeles in early 1962. She began filming Something's Got to Give, but was too sick to work. The studio pressured her, alleging publicly that she was faking it, which I think, is not nice, is it? Not nice at all.
Terrible.
We've got a message from Peter saying, hi, you two, looking forward to having a beer on the pier. Oh, yes.
Beer on
definitely,
the pier. Beer on the pier. See you soon.
See you soon, yes. And also, Laura Lee, I think you and Gary make a gorgeous couple together. Well,
that's very kind of you. Very
Thank
kind
you
of
very
you.
much.
Yeah. And then we've got here is very sad, the backstory to the Misfits for both Marilyn and Clark Gable. Yeah.
Yes, of course. And also one by Kevin is A Dark Side to Diana Dawes. Well, that will be for another show, methinks.
Yeah.
But yes, interesting stuff. So she began filming Something's Got to Give, but she was too sick to work on this. And as I said, the studio pressurized her to try and get her back by claiming she was faking her illness. On May 19th, she famously sang Happy Birthday, Mr. President.
You want to give us a version of that?
John F. Kennedy's birthday celebration. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, Mr. President. Happy birthday to you.
Bravo, bravo. May apply to Mr. Trump at some point, who knows? If you're watching, Donald.
You could do a Trump version.
Yes, exactly.
But unfortunately, due to more illness and rising costs from another film that Fox were also doing at the time, Cleopatra, which had Elizabeth Taylor in, Fox fired Marilyn and sued her for damages. Now, Dean Martin actually stood up for Marilyn, and he refused to make the film with anyone else apart from Marilyn. Because I think they didn't. They tried to get Lee Remick in the part instead, and he said, "No, I'm not going to do it without Marilyn." So bless him, he stood up for Marilyn, and then Fox sued him too. So that was nice. But however, Fox soon regretted its decision, and they reopened negotiations with Marilyn. And later in June, a settlement was reached.
He was fantastic. Dean Martin, I love Dean Martin.
I love Dean Martin.
Yeah, we love Dean Martin. We love Dean Martin.
He's my favourite. My favourite singer. He's brilliant.
Very handsome man. And the other interesting thing about Dean Martin is that he was never drunk, although he appeared drunk.
It was an act.
It was an act.
In the same way that Marilyn acted as a dumb blonde, it was an act. She wasn't really dumb.
Certainly not.
No. For sure. She was an extremely clever lady. Now, it's interesting with the happy birthday, just to go back to that, Mr. President, because the gown has been in the press again fairly recently with Kim Kardashian, hasn't it? Squeezing herself.
Squeezing into small framed...
with her big bottom.
Small frame Marilyn's dress.
Now,
impossible.
I don't think, personally, I don't think that was Marilyn's.
You wouldn't have been allowed to get that out, would you?
And I don't think so, because it's such a valuable, iconic gown that I don't think there's any way.
No way.
Kim Kardashian would have been allowed, and I don't.
Not
personally, I'm not wanting to offend anybody, but I personally don't think her big bottom would have fitted in the gown anyway.
Well, Marilyn was very petite, weren't she? So it was an impossibility, wasn't it? I know the papers tried to make out she'd squeezed into it, but I mean, that was ridiculous.
I don't think so.
No.
Ridiculous. I don't think so. And it's interesting as well because she was a bit late for that particular performance, wasn't she? And there's always been sort of rumours about that famous comment about the late Marilyn Monroe, because of course it wasn't that long after that she passed away.
Yeah, it's very sad. Yeah.
Yes. So she was also planning a number of projects at this point as well. She was planning on starring in a biopic of Jean Harlow, which I think is really interesting because Jean Harlow was an absolute icon and of huge interest to Marilyn. So I think, to me, because of the projects going on, that didn't really smack of somebody who was particularly suffering depression.
No.
In my opinion.
No.
Now, to move on to Marilyn's death during the evening of August 4th, 1962, Eunice Murray, who was her housekeeper, awoke at 3 a.m., allegedly, and said on August the 5th, she sensed something was wrong. She saw a light under Marilyn's door, but was unable to get a response, and she found the door locked. Murray then called Marilyn's psychiatrist, Ralph Greenson, who arrived at the house shortly after and found Marilyn dead on her bed. Marilyn's physician then arrived at 3:50 a.m., which is interesting. So that basically took almost an hour, and pronounced her dead. Now, the official cause of death was pronounced acute barbiturate poisoning and a probable suicide.
I think Peter Lawford was sent into, he was one of the first to visit the scene, wasn't he, Peter Lawford?
Well, I think that there are varying accounts of that. Some people say that he visited her and some not. I know she supposedly rang him and to say goodbye, but there's something about that doesn't really ring true personally.
Yeah.
So I don't.
He was linked to the Kennedy's family when they. So,
it was. Well, there's a number of conspiracy theories out there. One of the wackiest ones is that she knew about aliens, and that's why they got rid of her. But I don't think so.
No.
Another one is because of her involvement with the Kennedys, because obviously she allegedly was having an affair with John F. Kennedy and also Robert later on.
Yeah, it's a strange one. That,
they
isn't it?
tried to allege that obviously she was becoming a bit of a problem.
It is the thing, though. It's the honey trap thing again, though, isn't it?
Yes.
I mean, you think of all the connections that Marilyn had, and all the men that she was with, and where their connections to, whether it's to communism or whatever it was. It does make you think that there was something going on, and they were monitoring people as well as having a file on Marilyn. But
well, it's interesting in that later on, some years later, the owners basically were having her house remodeled when they purchased it, and they did find lots of wiretaps, and they were sort of standard FBI issue wiretaps as well. So yes, and I think Marilyn was very much aware that she was being monitored and listened to as well.
Well, it's interesting. You see about the toxicology report that showed that the cause of death was acute barbiturate poisoning. So it says, and she had 8 milligrams of where are we? Chloral hydrate and pentobarbital in her blood. And her liver, but some of the empty medicine bottles were found next to her bed. So it's difficult,
it's very difficult to say. But to me, Marilyn, I mean, I'm not an expert but I go by my feeling, and I would say that Marilyn was certainly not in the state of mind, because it's always pushed out there that, oh yes, well, she tried to take overdoses before and blah blah blah, but I think at this point,
it's a big step, isn't it?
It's a huge step, and she had achieved so much. But a lot of people cite her relationship with the Kennedys, and in fact, some people have gone as far as to blame the Kennedys, specifically Bobby Kennedy. I personally think it's a load of rubbish. I don't believe it. One iota. I think it's nonsense, and I think it's been deliberately disseminated to people to make them think that, but I don't think that at all.
No, it's interesting. I mean, there is some people who still believe that she faked her death, so that has to be seen, doesn't it?
Yes, there's also some conspiracy theory out there that in fact she faked her death, and
but she's still alive today. Well, she would be 97 if she, about 97. So I don't know about that.
The person that the conspiracy theorists had pushed forward, we should always consider ideas without dismissing them out of hand.
For sure, you don't know, do you? How do you know?
But the lady, I've seen pictures of this lady, and I'm not overly sure about that person.
We're not sure, but nevertheless, it could be. We don't know. And
we don't know, but there is always that possibility, and it's quite an interesting one to consider.
It is.
Another conspiracy has also put forward Marilyn's links to the mafia.
Well, it was Frank Sinatra, wasn't it?
And it was through her relationship with Frank Sinatra. I mean, he bought her famously a little white Maltese dog, which she called Maff, short for Mafia, which I think shows her sense of humour.
Yeah, she had a good sense of humour, yeah, definitely.
She most certainly did. So there are reasons to sort of wonder about all of these things. But I just have to say, if you're just joining us, we're broadcasting live on the United Public Radio Network 105.3 and 107.7 FM from New Orleans and also on Roku. Welcome to the Allens Investigate.
Yeah, we're doing a special on Marilyn Monroe. The beautiful Marilyn Monroe.
Legendary goddess and screen goddess and blonde bombshell.
Yeah, she had some lovely quotations. Do you want to read a couple? I've got a couple of quotations there. If you like.
Well, I can do, but I was just going to go and finish off the part about her death. Basically, what's also interesting, things that I took notice of, was the fact that she's supposed to have taken an overdose of barbiturates. Now, empty bottles were supposedly found next to her, but there were some interesting anomalies or discrepancies rather to this, in the fact that allegedly Eunice Murray was washing her bed sheets, which is a little bit odd,
unusual,
because
that smacks of a cover-up, doesn't it?
It does, because if you're concerned that there's something funny has gone on, you certainly wouldn't be touching anything, would you?
No, you touch nothing.
I've also understand that there were some timing discrepancies with the doctor and also Ralph Greenson as well, which
that was
probably be looked at.
Yeah.
But the one major thing, I think, is the fact that there were empty bottles, but there were no tablets spilled. There was no vomiting, which usually I would say when someone's taken an overdose of tablets, that your body naturally tries to reject it.
And it was the position of the body as well, wasn't it? That was a bit
So there's
suspect.
no signs of vomiting. No. She was just very peacefully, almost like someone had laid her out on the bed and arranged the scene. So one major clue also is the fact there was no liquid. So there was no glass of water or glass of anything in order to swallow tablets. And I would say this is a major clue in the fact that what's being told is not actually quite right or not satisfactory.
Maybe through things that's happening now with Q17 and that, maybe we may find the answer soon. Who knows?
Maybe. No. Well, it's interesting as well that with JFK's assassination, that not all of the documents have yet been released.
Yeah.
So we await the release of those.
Yeah, exactly.
To see what actually happened. And of course, Marilyn died first. And then it was roughly a year later, of course, as the famous assassination of John F. Kennedy.
Yeah.
And in fact, the Kennedys have had quite a number of interesting tragedies, shall we say, assassinations, plane crashes, and a number of things. So I think
a number of anomalies there, aren't there? This was
they're either incredibly unlucky or something else is going on.
Do you know, we were talking about Jean Cocteau, in our last show. It's interesting that French artist Jean Cocteau commented that her death should serve as a terrible lesson to all those whose chief occupation consists of spying on and tormenting film stars. So that's an interesting comment, isn't it?
Yeah, maybe. I mean, maybe from his point of view, it was more a case of, the press wouldn't leave her alone. They were constantly hounding her. So, I mean, there's sort of echoes of this with Princess Diana, isn't there? It's quite interesting. But interestingly, the coroner's report stated that there was no puncture marks on her body. Now, this, I feel, is very significant, because her doctor, Dr. Engelberg's bill, showed he had given her an injection the day before her death. So it should have been visible to the coroner.
Because there would have been bruised there, wouldn't they?
Yes, exactly. Yeah. So they would have been evidence because it would have had enough time. You know, we all know when we've had an injection of whatever, you do get bruising to the site, and there is, you know, a puncture
2 or 3 days, isn't it? Yeah,
so either the coroner was not entirely accurate on that day and was perhaps more interested in having his lunch, or something else is going on with that one. So I find that personally rather intriguing.
There's a question mark about that, yeah.
There is a big question mark. And also, I believe as well, when they went to call back tissue samples of Marilyn, they'd mysteriously disappeared.
Gone.
So I think that's quite interesting as well.
Yeah.
So all in all, I feel that
there is questions there, aren't there?
Things are not quite as they seem. I certainly think that Marilyn was very busy redecorating her home, buying new furniture. She had a number of projects on the go. She was a woman that had her own production company and, you know, everything to live for.
I think it's a difficult thing. You know, I mean, if someone's depressed or whatever and going through a hard time, I mean, I know what depression's like. But if you're going through a hard time, then it doesn't necessarily follow that you're going to kill yourself. It's a big step, isn't it? That is a really big step to take. You know,
absolutely.
And there's an interesting thing about Monroe's crypt, which is at Westwood Village Memorial Park Cemetery in Westwood Village. Her funeral was held at the Westwood Village Memorial Park Cemetery on August the 8th. It was private and attended by only her closest associates. The service was arranged by Joe DiMaggio, Monroe's half-sister Bernice Baker Miracle, and Monroe's business manager Inez Milson. Hundreds of spectators crowded the streets around the cemetery. Monroe was later entombed at crypt number 24 at the Corridor of Memories. And we did hear that what's his name?
Hugh Hefner.
Hugh Hefner is buried in the one above her. You know, he wanted to be put there, so I don't think she'd be very happy with that. But anyway, you can't.
I don't think she would have been
not really.
No.
But anyway, he's buried on top of her apparently. So that's how they say anyway. I don't know if that's right, but anyway.
And one romantic thing as well was the fact that Joe DiMaggio promised that he would put red roses on her grave as well, which he did, I believe, for about 20 years.
Oh, yeah, it's
which
amazing,
I think
isn't it?
A beautiful and incredibly romantic thing to do.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I'm sure he desperately loved her and he was desperately sad that all come to an end. Yeah, I mean, you know, and what about some of Marilyn's? Would you like to read a couple of Marilyn's quotations out?
Yeah, she did some really quite interesting quotations. We just picked a few of them. There are many out there. I think the thing is she had a really, really good sense of humor, and she knew how to work it to the press for sure. One of the things that she said, which really makes me laugh, she said, "Why, it's not true. I had nothing on. Why, I had the radio on."
Yeah, it's very funny, isn't it?
And a beautiful one that she said, which I think is
lovely, this
really
one.
Lovely. She said, "Sometimes things fall apart so that better things can fall together."
Yeah.
Which I think is lovely.
Yeah, exactly. And also the thing about what she said about Hollywood is very interesting as well.
Well, I just read this normally. I think she said, "In Hollywood, a girl's virtue is much less important than her hairdo. You're judged by how you look, not by what you are. Hollywood's a place where they'll pay you $1,000 for a kiss and 50 cents for your soul. I know, because I turned down the first offer often enough and held out for the 50 cents.
Yes, and Hollywood has a lot to answer for.
Yes,
so
it does.
It's very interesting.
And I think so. That's quite telling, interestingly, that Hollywood didn't really tend to appear at her funeral.
So I think we've covered about everything on Marilyn Monroe. What a beautiful lady.
I think she was a beautiful lady. And I think also it's interesting that you actually wrote a poem, didn't you, sometime
ago? Yes. We must play that, mustn't we?
Which you
was read on the BBC, it's interesting because we were on the BBC. What basically happened was that Shona, I had this thing one day and I said, I've got to write a piece on Marilyn Monroe, and she walked out the room. And a minute later, she came back and I said, I've written it. It's called A Letter to Marilyn Monroe. So I think we can play that, can't we?
Well, I'm going to have a go.
Going to have a go and get the stream up there.
Forgive me if I mess this up, because I'm not very good at this technical type stuff. So here we go.
A letter to Marilyn Monroe. Who could have ever dreamed of the life you would have? A babe to a beauty, unknown to an idol. Who truly knew you, the Hollywood star? Who could have loved you more than the millions now? I think I kind of knew you somewhere in my distant past. A girl with a head full of dreams. Where love deserted you, hope never did. Where pain tortured and wrecked you, hope never did. Where too many judged you without care or remorse. Marilyn Monroe, we knew only a shadow of what you were. Tears wore like a mask, where only your smile could deceive. I think that I love you now. I think I loved you then. Love, sweet Marilyn. That was you. You were so funny and bright too. Not at all dizzy. Oh no, not you. Beauty personified, man's perfect dream. No one could doubt you were a star in all scenes. All we are left with is all that you were. Love, beauty, and a star of an uncaring world.
Yeah, that was beautifully read by Shona, and one I'm very proud to have written. So that's great, isn't it? But to sum it all up, she was beautiful, intelligent, and lived her life like a candle in the wind.
She was a legend, and it's a testament to her, I think, that she's remembered 60 years on, and that people still want to look like her and to emulate her and pay homage to her. In music videos, films, there are still films being made about her to this day. And I think whenever you think of Hollywood, who do you think of? You think of Marilyn Monroe.
Marilyn Monroe, yeah.
She was an incredible woman.
Incredible woman.
Witty, intelligence, and not at all the dumb blonde.
God bless you, Marilyn.
God bless Marilyn, you legend.
Well, thank you, guys. Thank you for watching or listening, wherever you may be. And I hope you've enjoyed the show.
And thank you for joining us on the Allens Investigate. You can check us out at www.theallensinvestigate.com and Instagram and Facebook. We're broadcasting live on the United Public Radio Network, 105.3 and 107.7 FM from the beautiful city of New Orleans. And find us on Roku TV.
Yeah, if you want to check us out, it's www.thecockneybar.com and www.theallensinvestigate.com. And, well, thanks for listening.
Thank you.
There'll be some adverts in a minute.
It's time for you to get out and nominate your favorite podcasts. There's an amazing show I want you to consider for the People's Choice Podcast Awards. The News on the Flip Side, in the category of politics and news. News on the Flip Side is a much different news and political program which is not deemed as opinion news. Listen as Joe Montaldo brings to you just the facts from trusted sources which will allow you, the people, to make up your own minds on the various stories being reported on. Go to podcastawards.com to nominate News on the Flip Side in the category of Politics and News. That's podcastawards.com, and please take a moment and do it now. All right, everybody.
It's time for you to get out and nominate your favorite podcasts. There's an amazing show I want you to consider for the People's Choice Podcast Awards. Writers and Illustrators of the Future podcast, in 3 categories: education, storyteller drama, and art. For 4 years, the Writers and Illustrators of the Future podcast has provided advice and tips from international best-selling authors, world-class artists, contest judges and winners, and industry professionals based on the world-famous Writers of the Future contest created in 1983 by L. Ron Hubbard to help the aspiring writer and artist no matter their age. It is dedicated to the future of storytelling and art by showing that it is never too late to start, and those who make it are those who never give up. Go to podcastawards.com to nominate the Writers and Illustrators of the Future podcast in any or all of the 3 categories: education, storyteller drama, and art. That's podcastawards.com, and please take a moment and go out and vote now.
Looking for stories that are fresh and new? Dark fantasy, humor, space exploration, time travel, cyberpunk, alternate history, and more. They're in the L. Ron Hubbard Presents Writers of the Future Anthology from 24 award-winning authors and illustrators, plus art and writing tips and bonus stories. L. Ron Hubbard Presents Writers of the Future. Buy your copy at galaxypress.com, Amazon, or wherever books are sold.
You are listening to UPRN, United Public Radio Network, coming to you live on 105.3 right up to 107.7 FM from the beautiful city of New Orleans.